You guys sent through a bunch of Q&A questions, so I've kind of sorted them based on topic. So we'll start with the visa interview, some tips and tricks. Deborah will also fill in on that, and then we go into a bit of the housing things, and then some bank account and taxes details, and then some bits and bits at the end. And you guys can always like jump in and ask any questions. Really, it's a super small group, so this is also for you guys to get to know each other and share any advice that you guys have experienced along the way. Yeah, so with the visa interview, all of this information is also in our welcome magazine, but many of you will be entering this process now, if not have started already. So there's an overview of the checklist, yeah, I'm not going to read it all out loud, but I think the main thing is maybe Gijs, I know you have started the process already. If you could maybe just share to everyone else kind of how it's been going. Where have you now booked, for example? And yeah, and then also the tips and tricks about potentially, Yuri was saying with the bot that you can make. Yeah, then we can maybe just like share now. So Gijs, you just need to unmute yourself.
I just received my DS 2019 from Maggie, or at least the digital version 10 minutes ago. So that's where I'm in the process right now. Getting this DS 2019 took me a lot of time. I looked it up today, how many times it really took. For me, there were 48 days between submitting my stuff to CIEE and getting my actual DS 2019 number that I need to make an appointment at the consulate. So yeah, keep that in mind. I don't know if everyone is probably already like submitted your training plan and that kind of stuff, but it can take quite some time. And yeah, next step after you receive your number, you can make an appointment at the embassy. I managed to get one at the consulate of Amsterdam on the 18th of July, but that one is particularly busy. Some spots free up time to time, but there should be some alternatives where you can go to in Europe as well. But Brussels for me was also too busy by now. Like 2 months ago, they had a 7-day wait time, but right now that's also 70 days or 65 for J1s.
And you said they had a preference for nationals.
Yeah, exactly. So that also probably, yeah, they don't show you the best dates. I'd say if you in the sign up say that you're not a Belgian national. Yeah.
Okay. No, perfect. Thank you. And Yuri, you were saying there was potentially some other way where you can get an overview of the latest, shortest times.
Yeah, well, now I also I should start it. I'm not sure if it's like very legal, but that's not a thing. Like, it's not that it signs you up automatically. So there is an official website, US Embassy, that shows you the waiting time, but then you need to pick up date by, let's say, city by city manually. So what this parser does, it just generates the whole thing of all the places available. So that's okay. I can share that with you. From my side, it also took around 6 to 7 weeks to get the DS. So to get the approval from CIEE, I don't think I have the DS, so the paper itself, but I guess it's coming. So that was a long time. Yeah, I can maybe share that. Yeah, we'll share this one real quick. So from what I look now, you know, there are some places for the J visa, which is 1 or 2 days, even in Europe. But I agree that it depends. Most of the embassies give priorities to residents. I was lucky previously with Croatia, because this is how I got my B1 visa, because I just came from States 3 weeks ago. And yeah, I managed to get it within 3 weeks, but it's extremely fast. So just that's the first thing you should do. And I should also advise to myself, because I haven't done it yet. So I'm sending to the chat now.
Great. And then I know, Deborah, you might have some like tips and tricks just for the interview itself.
Yeah, happy to. So a few points. We are aware indeed. Thank you for flagging that and for keeping us in the loop. That's very important. So thanks to you, we are aware of the long waiting times at CIEE. We've brought this repeatedly to the attention of the NAF as well, to pressure them to speed up things a bit more. I have good hopes that soon they will have extra staff again at CIEE, but that's something that we will continue to stress in order to hopefully cut that waiting time to being less long. With regard to the waiting times at the US consulates and embassies, that is also something that our ambassador here in the US, the Netherlands ambassador in the US, is tracking very carefully, and is also in conversation with the US consulate in Amsterdam specifically. Indeed, a couple of months ago, we received from them very long waiting times and the recommendation to then schedule appointments at other US embassies and consulates. Brussels at that time indeed being the quickest one in turnaround. I realize that that's also an enterprise for you to figure that all out. Have a look at Brussels, have a look maybe also at Frankfurt, because that's also pretty easily available by train. Those are the ones that would be the most logical. I would not necessarily recommend Paris because they have very long waiting times typically, and really prioritize also French citizens heavily. So if at any point there is a real issue that is being created there, let me know, but there's also only that much that we can do. Then when it comes to the actual interview, so I have been on on 2 J1s myself. I've been on a J1 trainee, and I've been on a J1 researcher visa. The way in which the process goes, indeed, you first fill out your training plan with CIEE, you have then your DS 2019, you need to pay the CIVIS fee, and with all of that documentation, you can then fill out an application form on the website of the US government. You have to print that out. You have to also bring a passport picture. You take your entire folder with you, and you can finally go to the US embassy. There, you will have to go multiple times to the window. It's a bit like at the DMV. You'll have to go to the window to have a first check of your paperwork. You'll have to take a seat again. You will have to go to another window. They will ask for your picture. You will have to go to another window. They will ask for your passport. You will sit again. And then finally, you will be called upon to have the interview with a consul. So the person that will conduct the interview is actually one of the consuls present to do an intake with you. They will ask you about information that is in your training plan. So read your training plan carefully before going into your interview. You must be able to explain your starting dates, the duration of your internship, who your manager is going to be, how you found your internship, what your ideas are of your roles and responsibilities throughout this internship, where the company is based. They might ask you how much you will make. They might ask you where you will be living, if you have an idea of the city where you will be living, how you will be looking for housing. And they might also ask you if you are intending to return after the program is done. The last one is a tricky question. I myself, as I'm an example of a J1 that got stuck in the US. I'm now my 4th visa and I'm still here, so it is possible. However, if at the interview you answer, yes, I want to stay after, then you might actually block your chances for success at that point, because a J1 is actually envisioned as an exchange visa. The answer to that question then is, I'm now being onboarded for this time. My intention is to return after, unless if the company works with me on future employment and work authorization. I might keep that option open, but right now my intention is to return after. Your intention can change, right? You haven't promised that you will come back. You are expressing your intention. But if you tell them at that point when they ask you after your program ends, do you intend to stay in the US? And you say yes, then you might have some alarm bells sound, because you might then exceed the validity of your visa, and that might be a reason for them to block you. Also, what happens a lot in the online application form, you will have to fill out a lot of questions. You will have to answer questions about transferable diseases. You will have to answer questions even if you have terrorist affiliations. And it's a lot of yes, no. Read them all carefully, because sometimes, and this happens every year, students just do everything. They see the first 4 and they say no, and then they just do no for the entire thing. But then you might actually press answer wrong on one of the questions, which might hold back your visa application at that point in time too. So please read every question very carefully and don't withhold any information during the interview. The interview is pretty short. Typically, it's 5 minutes. It's not that long, but be prepared. And also mention that you are part of the Internships in the Valley program, which is a collaboration with the Dutch consulate in San Francisco. I think that will also give you a competitive edge at that point in time. Typically, I would say 90% of the J1 interviews, it is a go. Just make sure that you answer according to what is indeed in your training plan as well. Yuri, you have a question.
Yeah, I do have a question. So, well, I thanks for the elaborated overview. I've just gone through the similar procedure, but for B1 visa. I know it's not a thing for Dutch residents because you have ESTA, I think. But so the question I have is, it is very possible to be a subject for administrative check with my background for multiple reasons. Because actually so I'm studying physics, applied physics, but my internship is also has a lot of chemistry in there. And I know it also rings a few bells. For example, when I was going for a conference, it's in renewable energy, but I'm doing materials. And then I kind of shaped it to a way that's okay, this is more photovoltaics, so energy related. But she directly, the consul directly asked me, hey, what are you going to do with chemistry? What do you do with chemistry? And well, then I was honest, but still trying to refer that just, it's not my main thing. But I know, like, if you look at my training plan, it says process chemistry, and it's on the department. So any maybe tips or an advice on that, because I know it may be a bit, they can take me for the check, and that's time consuming.
Yeah, no, great question. That is relevant to all of you. Americans are very protective on 2 points. One is hire Americans and create employment for Americans. So that's the first real tip. You're going for an internship. And make sure to make that clear, even if you're more advanced already, and if your internship position is actually more of a job that you will be doing, you refer to it as an internship. You are not, in their eyes, you are not stealing a job away from an American. You are there to contribute with your expertise from the Netherlands for an internship period. And after the internship period, you return to go back home. You are not basically taking away an American job. That is the phrasing on the first part. That is important to have when you walk into that interview. The second fear that they often have is with regard to intellectual property, espionage, confidential information. You each had to sign an NDA as well with your companies. You each also had to list your intellectual property that you currently already have developed or not. That is also something that might come up indeed. And then in regards to this, indeed, when it is with regards to sectors, for example, chemistry, for example, particular types of engineering that are more prone to state sensitive information, they might ask you additional questions to this point. What I would advise you is in your folder that you bring, so you have your printed out application form, your picture, I would also print out your training plan, your DS 2019 as well, of course, but I would also print out the contract and any other paperwork that you have signed with your company and bring that with you as well. So at that point in time, you can also just show them like, yeah, good question. For example, with regard to chemistry, this is what I will or won't be working for. I was also asked to, for example, sign, I think, the applied materials candidates were also asked to sign, I forgot what it's called, the foreign, it was like this foreign form, you know what I mean, at the end of your contract. I think if you show them that, they will be put a bit at ease because your company has already taken those steps. Also, with regard to previous travel to the US, be honest about when you came, what it was that you did. If one of you has been to, for example, Iran or other countries that are currently still blacklisted by the US government, be honest about that in your application form, but you will get a lot of questions on that as well. So then you will really need to have a good story why you were there, if you were there for touristic purposes, how long, what it was that you saw. They might really grill you on those aspects, but for most of you, that won't be an issue.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions about the visa interview specifically? No, perfect. Okay. Yeah, and then obviously always, if you guys more questions come up, send us an email and we'll get back to you.
And it also depends who the interviewer will be. I've had a J1 interview that went really nice, and I had one that didn't go as well initially. It's just make sure that you have your documentation with you. In case of doubt, you can show them. You can show them all the paperwork you have signed with your company. I think that's the most important. So they also know that you're in good hands with the company as well.
Right.
And I think you'll all be fine because you're also part of the program.
Yeah, no, exactly. Then yeah, just rehash. It is all in the welcome magazine. Read that through carefully, and then have that checklist with you, and then add the extra documents like the contract and everything.
Can I add one more thing? If at any point the interview gets very unpleasant, which I don't predict it's going to be, but then you can also express very calmly that you disagree, for example, with the line of questioning or with the conclusion that they have reached. If, for example, they want to withhold you, you can say that you disagree with that you will confer with the Internships in the Valley program, and that we will reach out to the American consulate with regard to this point. So you keep it calm. At no point start yelling, because you're still dealing with American authorities. If you start yelling or if you start making too much of a scene, then you might end up on a blacklist and might not be able to enter the US for the next 10 years' time. So if at any point there is an issue, stay calm, state that you want them to make a note that you disagree, that you will get back with a program, that they will be in touch, and that you would like to set up a new appointment with them. And then you just leave. Okay, that as a tip. But again, I think you'll all have not even 5 minutes. It will just be a stamp and you'll be out with good news.
Fingers crossed. Perfect. The next topic is housing. So again, most of this is in the magazine, so I'll keep it brief, but generally some do's and don'ts. And I think if everyone lives in Amsterdam, I think it's a very much the similar flavor. So everything's expensive, so do expect roommates. I think it's a little bit worse than Amsterdam, so definitely expect roommates. And definitely search through a different website. So expand your search, don't just look at one source. We did post a bunch of different resources in the magazine. So there are a couple of Facebook groups and then Craigslist as well, for example. So look across all those ones. And yeah, perseverance and flexibility is the key to success in this case. Yeah, check out your neighborhood beforehand. Do your research, check in with us, and yeah, do a good Google Maps search to see what the area is like. And yeah, can't emphasize this enough. So try find your ultimate housing situation on site, figure out some temporary accommodation, and then do the room search in person. But if that is not possible, then try do video calls, try do it with the landlord or with the current roommates there. And yeah, don't expect a cheap deal. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. And that's the between 800 to 1,600 per room is the range. This might be a little bit outdated, Deborah. I'm not sure if this still holds, because the magazine, we made this a little while ago. So maybe just correct me if I'm wrong, if this is still realistic.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. A few points indeed. I think you can still get a room for $800 if you're in the neighborhood where I am, which is the Outer Sunset, very close to the beach. It's a bit further away from the city. I love it here. It's like a little surfers village. So rent is a bit lower here. So that might be feasible, more in the city center. I think you will have to count for 1,000 minimum, probably 1,200. Up to, I would say, 2,000 currently. The prices have gone up. Real estate has never been as expensive as it currently is in the Bay Area, unfortunately. But your competitive edge will be if you do an internship that's, for example, for half a year. I would advise you to look into sublets, because sublets, those rooms will come furnished. You won't have to get furniture for yourself. And those rooms will have better pricing because you are taking over somebody's maybe rent controlled unit for a while. So if your internship is less than a year long, I would advise you to look for sublets. If your internship is, for example, 9 months or longer, then I would recommend you to indeed look for co-housing situations, where it's also more easy for you to find a room. We will draft, that's actually to do for me. I will draft you all a letter that you can send to prospective landlords or roommates that basically attests to your employment, that will mention, you know, that you are part of the consulates program, and that will also give an indication of that your income will be above a certain mark. So you have some kind of documentation to show them. You don't have a credit score right now in the US. They will ask for a credit score sometimes. You don't have that. So this is an alternative. A lot of landlords do take such an attestation instead of a credit score. If you look for an apartment by yourself, then it will be harder, or a studio, because then indeed the questions with regard to credit score and the likes will be harder than if you are part of a house. Plus, I also think it's more social and more fun for you. Probably you'll have more American contacts and friends if you live in a shared house. Some of the most used Facebook groups are in the brochure. If at any point you have questions about that, feel free to reach out. Yes, a lot of the housing market is still on Facebook here, Facebook Marketplace too. People don't really use it for social interactions, but they do use it for housing. Craigslist you can also use, but Craigslist is pretty well known for its scams as well. We actually had a employee from the consulate who was a trainee at the time, 2-3 years ago, who unfortunately got scammed. So what I would advise you is either you find for housing in advance, you have a conversation with them, you put them also in touch with me, or you send me the link so I can also verify if need be, or I can drive past, see if the address is real and all of the likes. Happy to do that for you if it's not all the way in San Jose. What I actually would advise most of you is for your first month to take an Airbnb nearby your work, and then use that as a venture point to start your housing search. Because a lot of housing, if you start looking now for housing in September, it's way too early. The housing market opens up like 6 weeks or a month before actual move-in date. So apartments will appear very close, or they will be available as is. And a lot of roommates will want to meet you maybe online or in person. You will also might want to see the room in person as well. So if you do an Airbnb for about a month, then you give yourself a month time on site to look safely and also be able to view it in person. That is my main recommendation, to also avoid being scammed at that point in time. Yeli, you have a question?
Yeah, if I can add something to the Airbnb thing, because if you book an Airbnb and you do like a month, then you often get a large discount. Well, if you do like 29 days, then you don't get the discount. I already booked an Airbnb, so I got like a 50% discount just because I had like 30 days.
Exactly.
So that's useful to look for.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I actually have a question. Is subletting legal, or we would be doing that kind of illegally, essentially? Oh, it's very okay. Because it is more of a problem here, especially if you want to register with a BSN number and someone else is registered. So that's not an issue. Okay.
You also don't have to register here with the city. You just need to get your social security number. You need an address. You can use that address for that. And also for your employer, no, subletting is not an issue. No, good question.
Yeah, and then obvious, don't wire any money beforehand. Yeah, then to round it off, so all the links to the temporary options and the longer ones, at least a lot of the Facebook groups, we added to the welcome magazine in the bottom corner there. So,
and maybe one more thing, if I may add. So a lot of you will be working in Silicon Valley itself. Just think about what fits your vibe best, what you would feel is the best fit. It's very different to live in San Francisco than it is to live, for example, in Mountain View or Palo Alto or Redwood City. Those spots in Silicon Valley are very often more families. You have condos, so apartments around the pool. The weather is a lot warmer down there than it is in the city. The city is colder and foggy, but the city is also younger. There are more international people than there are typically there. It might be easier for you to make friends up in the city, but then you want to be close to main ports of transportation. So you can take the BART, that's the rapid train, or you can take the Caltrain easily to work. Or if you are expecting to drive and buy a car, then you want to be in a neighborhood that is, safe enough to leave your car at. So if you're considering that, feel free to check in with me and I can also help you with that. If you think it's easier for you to be close to work because you also have checked in with your manager and a lot of your colleagues live close to work. It might be actually easier to make friends with them, to grab drinks after work together. Then that might be a factor to take into consideration, to live closer to work, for example, in Silicon Valley. But then again, I would advise you to be close enough to public transportation points so you can also come up to the city more easily. Public transportation is not as good here as it is in the Netherlands. So that is definitely something that you need to look at when looking for housing.
Right. Do any of you still have questions related to housing or finding a room? No, perfect. Then the next topic is bank account and taxes. So how I've done it now is you guys send through a bunch of questions. So they'll pop up and then I think, Deborah, you'll take over each one as we go along. Perfect. So the first one is, how will I be paid as an intern?
You will be paid in dollars, and the way on an American bank account, because that's also a question many of you had. So yes, you will need to open an American bank account, and you will be paid either every 2 weeks or once a month, and it will be at the beginning of the month. Typically, it is, for example, on the 1st or of the 3rd for the last month. Sometimes employers pay you on the 26th or on the 28th of each month. So that's also something you want to ask your HR in advance, around which date do they typically pay you. And it should be stated in your contract if you get it monthly or if you get it bi-weekly. And then I would also ask your HR how they actually will be paying you. So either you will be added as an employee to payroll. That means that your money will be directly wired into your American bank account, or it might be that they have different agreements for interns and that they will pay you by means of check. So actually a checkbook, as we had in the 90s in Europe, that is still a means of payment that is used a lot in the US, believe it or not. I pay my rent by check every week. As a J1 researcher, I was paid in checks. As a trainee, I was paid the first half in checks, sent to me via postal mail, and the other half was done by means of bank transfer. So it depends if you can choose. I would definitely choose for the bank wiring, and I would ask that you are added to payroll. That makes it easier for everybody involved, but it really depends on how HR deals with that at every company. Yuri.
I'm sorry, I appear to be the worst prepared.
No, it's great. Questions.
Now, so first thing I wanted to ask you is, actually in my contract, I think that the salary is provided per hour. So I'm not sure if it's the thing for other people from Applied or generally.
Yeah, you all have the same contract.
I think mine, I'm not sure. I think maybe the payroll is slightly different because of my PhD, but I may be wrong. Anyway, so I was just wondering, like, how does it work? Because like in Netherlands, you sign up for the contract which says 40 hours. And here they just say per hour. So, okay, if I work longer, does it make me, I don't know, a thicker paycheck? Probably not. But I was just wondering if you have experience with that. If no, we can just move on.
Good question. Typically, a work week in the US is 40 hours. So that's a bit more than often in Europe, 40 hours. And that is something that I would also ask them in writing on the email to your manager and to HR. Be like, hey, my contract says hourly. I assume that will be 40 hours a week. Will that automatically be calculated this way? Or for example, what happens in terms of overtime? Is there, will that be taken into consideration or not? I would ask them if you're paid hourly, how they deal with overtime. Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask another thing here? Maybe it's slightly off topic. So I also got contacted by the company, or it's called NIE Global Relocation. It was made through Applied Materials. So I was just wondering if anyone else had it. So because I think that they're gonna send me a check for relocation. So I was wondering how does it work?
Yeah. So some of you indeed get your relocation costs covered by the company. That is really nice, I must say, and definitely not standard for interns. So whoever has gotten that as part of their deal, that's pretty exceptional. The Applied Materials candidates indeed have this as part of their contract. I would also contact them and ask that in this case, your money will be wired, if possible, into your European bank account, because you don't have an American bank account yet. And you will only be able to open your American bank account once you are present in the US. If that is not possible for them, then it might be that the relocation cost can only reach you once you are present in the US. So that's something you will have to clear with them. I think it should be possible for them to do it on a European account though. But then it's also important to tell them that they need to also look at extra costs that might be. And I would ask that. Also be aware that if you want to transfer money from your European bank account to an American bank account, you pay costs for that. And those are pretty high. It's a certain percentage depending on your bank, plus a fee for every transfer you make. So if you're thinking, for example, when you begin here and you want to have a bit of money already on your American bank account, then I would advise you to use, for example, TransferWise or other platforms that do a one-off fee and are actually cheaper to have your money reach your American bank account, but it takes a bit longer. It can take up to a week for the money to get there. And it's completely safe.
Yeah, actually, so because I'm from South Africa, so I also had that same kind of issue with how to get money across. And for me, I actually set up a Revolut account, which worked really well. So, and obviously that works with, I think they have like 24 currencies, dollars, 100% one of them. So if you set up that as well, that means at least you'll definitely have some money. And they are very competitive in their transfer rates. So if anyone wasn't aware of Revolut existing, it's very useful for that.
How do you spell it?
Revolut, I'll put in the chat.
Yep, thanks.
Perfect. Perfect. And the next question, Deborah?
Maybe one more thing about the banks. Also be careful when you go to your European banks. If you mention that you will be going to the US or mention a US bank account, you make all of the bells sound in your European banking institution, because they have such a fear of the American banking industry that they might want you to close down your accounts in the Netherlands. It's not illegal to have accounts in both countries, especially because you're also on a temporary visa in the US. But the average banking clerk does not realize that. So my advice is to not bother your bank with questions about your American account if not needed. I would ask them maybe how much transferring costs are, just that, but that's all I would do in order to avoid any trouble there.
Then the next question will be quick, right? So can my monthly salary be deposited into my Dutch bank account?
No. Typically, no. There are a few American companies that do offer that, but most American companies will exclusively want to wire your money into an American bank account.
Then the next is, will I be taxed in the US and the Netherlands?
So there is a tax treaty between the Netherlands and the US. So that means that you will only need to pay taxes if you need to pay taxes once on the same income, right? So it won't be that if you are expected to pay taxes in the US, that then after you will be expected to also pay Dutch taxes on it. No. The way in which your tax declaration will work will depend on whether you're added to payroll or paid in checks, and will also depend on the amount that you make and also on the state that you will be active in. For example, California has completely different income taxes than, for example, Massachusetts, or than, for example, Utah, or than, for example, Oregon, right? That's different for each state. So I would advise you to look up that state income tax percentage for your particular state, and that gives you already a percentage. Typically, that will be, some states don't have income tax, for example, Florida. Some other states will be up to maybe 20%. So look that up so you can already have that at the back of your mind. And then you will need to add federal income tax to that, which is also not a lot. In total, it will be less, in the heavy states, it will be less than 30%. But most likely you won't be expected to pay taxes. You will be expected to do a tax declaration, and the declaration season always begins in April. So for your income that you make in 2022, you will need to file your taxes in April 2023. Even if you've left the US at that point, you will still need to file your taxes with the IRS. And then you will receive a form. We can also send that form at that point to you. That is basically an application for tax exemption. And if you make less than a certain threshold, and as an intern, most often in 99% of the cases, you will be tax exempt. And you file this to the IRS. If they agree, you're tax exempt and you actually don't need to pay taxes. You also don't have to declare it in the Netherlands then anymore because you've already declared it, even though you didn't pay for it, you declared it in the US. So then you're done with that part, right? If you still have income going on in the Netherlands, then you need to file for that separately, of course, or if you have property in the Netherlands, right? So that continues the way it is. If in your particular case you are expected to pay taxes, which again, I don't really foresee, but it might be the case depending on how your company is paying you. And if you make a very, very large sum at a certain point, or they give you extra bonuses that exceed a certain point, then it might be healthy to just keep about 30% of your income aside, because then it's being deducted afterwards, right? It's not that you get your income already with the taxes applied to them. Typically, sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. So again, that's a question to ask your employer. Then secondly, with regard to housing still, I think a healthy rule of thumb is to have about a fourth, maximum a third of your income go to your housing, right? So also think about that when you look for housing. So you have enough set aside, but all of you have really nice offers currently on the table. So that's great. We will be organizing sessions with TurboTax, which is an app, a very user-friendly app that I also use here to declare my taxes. And they do sessions specifically also for J1 intern students where you can ask all of your questions. We will do that closer to tax season. So that will be in about February or March. So you can ask them everything you want to know, and they can also help you individually with any further questions you might have.
Perfect. I think you've already answered a few, but let's carry on. How do most interns pay for their expenses? Essentially,
yeah.
Debit and credit cards. What's the setup?
Yeah, most expenses, for example, the supermarket will be debit credit cards. Once you have an American bank account, for example, with most American banks currently, the bigger banks here being Chase, being, for example, Wells Fargo, being, for example, Bank of America, Bank of the West, you will also have Quick Pay Zelly. So even if you want to wire money from one bank account to another in the US, you also pay costs on that. The banking system is very antiquated here. Two ways to deal with that is Quick Pay Zelly is offered by those banks. Then it is possible for you to wire money directly to somebody else's account, and it reaches them within the same day without any costs attached to it. So that would be one reason that I would advise you to go with one of these bigger banks that has that. Plus another way to pay, for example, friends for dinner and the likes is once you have an American bank account, you can also download Venmo, which is an app that you can link to your bank account, and you can wire money very easily then to each other as well without the extra costs. With regard to your rent, it will depend. Sometimes you will need to pay it via Zelly, sometimes via bank transfer. Very often it is also via check. So you might have to buy a little checkbook with your bank as well when you open your bank account. And in order to open a bank account, you will need an address in the US. And they might also ask for your social security number. So I would also look that up in advance. And banks, again, that I could recommend are either Chase, Bank of America, Bank of the West. What could also be useful to know is if your company pays you in bank wires and transfers, you could ask your company which bank they use. If you go with the same bank, the money will land quicker in your account than if you're with a different bank.
Amazing.
Might save a few.
How do I open? You've already kind of touched on it. So it's essentially you need an address and you need a social security number.
And I can also put you in touch with a few banks. If at any point you want to talk to anybody at a bank about questions, I have a few good contacts that I'm happy to provide you with.
So if I pay taxes in the US, have I already paid the taxes when receiving the salary, or do I have to pay it afterwards?
Typically, yeah, it depends. It depends on the company. So I would also ask this to your HR. Typically on your pay stub, it will say, so you will have a pay stub which will have an exact breakdown of the costs. It might be that they already withhold part of the taxes, and that then after, you know, you can get it back basically, so that you leave with quite a lot in your bank account. It might also be that it is not being withheld yet. So I would ask them that, and you will also see it on your first pay stub.
Then I think this is the last one. So can I transfer money of a minimal amount to a Dutch bank account without paying additional taxes?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So you will have fees, banking fees attached to that, right? Unless you use, for example, TransferWise or other tools that still come with a certain cost, but lower cost. Taxes, not necessarily. For example, after the end of your internship duration, you still have money in your American account. You want to bring that to your Dutch account. I totally get that. You will be asked to include this in your Dutch tax declaration, right? They will ask you if you have any money abroad, and if it's above a certain threshold, yes or no. Typically, I don't think a lot of you, I would assume that you won't have more than, let's say, 100,000 in your American bank account. So typically you should be good, and you won't need to pay any tax for that. Also, if you bring smaller sums over, it shouldn't be an issue. I would say as soon as you go over $20,000, then maybe check in with me again, and then we'll look into that.
And yeah, so Deborah has already mentioned it. So, but we will host a TurboTax seminar at soon, so closer to the tax season, with you and help you through it. And then there'll be a tax expert that will then know the details, because obviously now it's more based on personal experience. Do any of you still have questions about this topic? Great, amazing, cool. Then these are kind of some of the smaller questions that you guys had, so we'll go through these quickly. So Dutch driver's license is valid in the US, so it's valid for up to 6 months. This is actually technically for people visiting. So if you're buying or renting a car for longer term, maybe that you are then expected to show a US driver's license. Jump in, Deborah, if you have anything to add still.
Yeah. And you can get an American driver's license by going to DMV, Department for Motorized Vehicles. And that's literally as you see in the shows. It is as slow and as complicated as they show you there. However, if you're staying, for example, for half a year, then I would say you'll be doing fine without a driver's license, an American driver's license. If you're staying for a year, then I would advise you to get your driver's license here, and I would make work of that as soon as you arrive. It's pretty easy. On the DMV website of California, you can already fill out quite a lot online. You will be asked to take a knowledge test, so you will have to study a bit for that. It's not too much the handbook, but you will be asked to study the Californian driving rules, or if you're in a different state, the rules of that particular state. And then you will also be subject to a driving test in California as well. Other states handle different parts, different agreements with regard to international driver licenses, but that's the case in California. Yuri.
Actually, speaking of California, I've read that you can even buy a car for international driving license. So that's one of the few states which allows that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think this was a reliable source. So yeah. They only ask you for CCN number and address, and if you have it, that's fine.
Yeah, it depends where you buy your car, how you buy your car. Typically, once you buy a car, you will also be expected to declare it at the DMV. So if you have to be there anyway, then I would encourage you to just get it over with and get your American driver's license. So if you buy a car, you will have to go anyway at a certain point. It might be that you don't need it yet at the time of the purchase, but once you need to declare it, and you need to declare it within, I think, 2 weeks of purchase, pretty fast after, then you will have to go in anyway, and then you might be asked to get your driver's license nonetheless. So if you buy a car, I would also say get your driver's license, also with regard to your insurance and the likes. It will be much easier for you. If you're thinking of leasing a car, or using a roommate's car, or doing, for example, Zipcar, which is a shared car service, then it's not absolutely necessary.
Yeah, that kind of also goes into the next question was exactly this. So you said you have experience with the Carvana.
Yeah, so I bought my car on Carvana a few months ago, which is an all online platform. And I had a great experience with that. A few of my colleagues too. You can also look on Craigslist, CRAIGS list. They also sell quite a lot of cars. Cars are pretty expensive right now worldwide. So there's nothing that can be really done about that, unfortunately. You can also put a little note in the Dutch NSF Facebook group. Maybe there's a few people there who want to sell their cars, or who are looking for a buyer, or who have additional tips. But I would say secondhand cars, these will be your best options. Craigslist, Carvana. You can also go to dealerships. The dealerships, it really depends. They might add last minute fees that weren't part of the discussion before. So I would not necessarily recommend that.
Great. And so that kind of rounds off the driving in the US topic. And then, yeah, finally, some other logistical questions that we had was, so where do I get a SIM card? Yeah, at smaller drugstores or grocery stores, and there are a bunch of different service providers. Some are more widely used, such as Cricket Wireless, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, but they're also cheaper options. But yeah, it should be pretty straightforward to get that. Would recommend, obviously, to get it. Deborah, do you have anything to add now, right?
Yeah, the three biggest ones are AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon. I personally have had, as an international student, bad experiences with AT&T in the past, with a lot of hidden costs. So I would not necessarily recommend that one to you. Verizon has the best coverage, but is also a bit more expensive. T-Mobile is also pretty expensive, but has good coverage. They are about, depending on the data usage that you want, you can get prepaid cards, so you can get a subscription. You can also altogether share a family plan that might actually be cheap. So you can agree on that as well. And you can add each other's number to have a line like that. So that's also something you can look into if you're staying for about the same period of time. That might actually be your cheapest option. Or you can go to, for example, Sprint, Mint, or T-Mobile, which have prepaid cards. I am with Ultra Mobile right now, and I pay, I think, $40 a month, which is a lot cheaper than my boyfriend, who is with Verizon and who pays $60 a month. So it depends a bit on your usage as well.
Yeah, cool. Then the next is how to get a CS or social security number. So fill out the paperwork by your employer. Any more details?
Yeah, this is also a question to ask HR. You will need to have your paperwork done with your employer. You will need to bring your contract, and then you will need to make an appointment once you are physically present. It's pretty easy. The appointment only takes like 5 minutes, but this goes through your employer.
Yeah. And yeah, then just we've already covered it, but just again, because it's one of the questions was, can you book a constant appointment before getting your service ID? And no. So you need it as part of your booking procedure. So perfect. And yeah, with that, it kind of wraps it up.